Hello again. Today we're breaking the mold on retrospectives and dipping more into theory as we discuss why I think RWBY are playing with the traditional arch-rival trope. For reference, this trope is fairly broad, encompassing antagonists, heroes, and rivals, but in the broad strokes, especially when discussing heroes and villains, it means one heroic character and one villainous character in direct and constant opposition. Their relationship is heated, usually hateful, and narratively important to both sides as they clash. Sometimes the villain might not take the hero seriously, but that alone doesn't discount the rivalry and is usually only at the start of things. In essence, a rival could be described as the one true foe as opposed to the one true love. So what is RWBY doing differently? Well, being a series that is in of itself riffing on the nature of stories and dabbling in postmodernism, it is not surprising they'd maybe get a little meta with it. I think no one embodies this better than Cinder, someone who clearly has a story in her head in which she's the star and in which she has a destiny, despite Remnant being a very self-deterministic world. She first perceived Pyrrha as her rival and viewed her defeat of the false form maiden as the climax to her personal arc. Then RWBY came in and burnt off her arm and eye and left her in emotional tatters. The traditional way to play this would be that Pyrrha was the false rival and RWBY is the true rival. And despite Cinder's own views that RWBY never should have been born, there's a lot to unpack there, she's very much viewed RWBY as such since her initial defeat. RWBY, however, doesn't. Not to say she won't fight Cinder or view her as a threat, but RWBY will fight anyone doing evil, and while there's concern for her comrades when Cinder is around, Cinder as a person, as a foe, does not occupy RWBY's mind. This is partially reflective of RWBY's sharp focus in battle that is rarely personal to her. It's not honourable or glorious, her foes are just a problem to be solved efficiently and with minimal collateral damage. Narratively, thematically, and in terms of roles to play, the most likely rival for RWBY is Salem, at least as things stand now. Or to put it another way, Cinder thinks RWBY is her main rival, but in reality she picked wrong again. Her most likely rival is Janur, not Jaune alone but the whole team, all of whom she's barely aware of, but whom actually have the strongest claim to rivaldom with Cinder. Of course, Emerald does throw a crowbar into this and may be folded into the conflict, but that's for later. Now, I noted that RWBY is Salem's rival, but this is amusing to me because like her student, Salem has also picked wrong. Because Salem views her foe as Ozpin and she based her strategies on and around him, viewing these new people as beneath her, only a magical and her cursed counterpart could possibly be the one to defeat her after all. Ozpin presumed much the same, but honestly he and Oscar would most likely be Ironwood's rivals, hence Oscar being the one to confront Ironwood and not RWBY. Of course, Oscar Ozpin didn't face Ironwood alone, as is customary for many series with rivalries, which is reflective of another spin on the classic trope. The heroes usually avoid playing into one-to-one duels that give their rivals the advantage or what they want. For ease of reference, another series that played rather cleverly with this sort of trope was Order of the Stick, with an extremely meta arc that riffed on Star Wars. That culminated in one of the protagonists, but not the main hero, delivering a crushing psychological victory over their evil general father by refusing to play the hero role ascribed to them by the man, establishing themselves as the no longer lawful good child and disregarding their father as the main villain, leaving him howling and alone in the desert, lost and overwhelmed by how the traditional narratives had been completely overturned. RWBY itself has shown hints of this on the villain's side, specifically Tyrion's, when he played on the idea to Crow of actually caring about settling some score with him. And we all know how that turned out. I've seen theories floating around that his true rivals are Emerald and maybe Mercury and he's not yet realised it because he perceives them as victims, but I don't feel that that disproves my point any more than Jaune trying and failing to fight Cinder does. Because regardless, as matters stand, Tyrion is the only villain who's shown the necessary self-awareness to understand the prospect of rivalries and to use the trappings of the trope to his advantage in a manner similar to the heroes refusing to fight alone. In contrast, we have Adam, who would pivot between viewing Blake as his rival or her love interest as his rival, but was violently vexed by their dismissal and overwhelmed by their combined skill. Ironwood, who viewed Salem as his rival, while she mostly viewed him as someone to ignore unless Ozpin took over, and was ultimately defeated by a former follower who rejected him having any sway in her fate. Neo, who allows herself to be diverted from her focus on Cinder by the prospect of an easier target in RWBY, and now is driven to the point of self-destruction to glean some catharsis from the quest before she dies. Cinder, who is obsessed with someone who barely pays her any mind and whose narrative arc is not trajectorially aligned with hers. Salem, who is effectively living in the past and can't see who her true foe really is. And Watts, who amusingly probably is the only villain who came close to getting the traditional showdown he might have wanted, which he then lost. Then, when he got his second chance, rather than learning anything from the experience, he was immediately betrayed by his own allies and left to burn in the fire he helped start. There's probably a lot to be said about projecting roles onto others, the importance of teamwork as opposed to one-on-one duels that grants the heroes agency where otherwise there'd be none, but mostly I just think this is kind of neat. Thanks for watching, and as usual, if you want to support my work, please consider donating to my Ko-fi or Patreon. The latter will also give you access to stories, 3D art, and previews for upcoming episodes. Thanks for tuning in!